Before we continue, if you believe kindness can change a stranger's life, and second chances sometimes arrive when we least expect them, please like, comment, share this video, and subscribe to Legacy and Lies. Your support helps us keep sharing stories about ordinary people whose smallest acts of compassion become unforgettable. Rowan watched the girl for several seconds before approaching, careful not to frighten her. Her son, Callum, noticed her too and instinctively stayed close to his mother. The airport was especially crowded that afternoon because several morning flights had been delayed by storms farther north. Families were packed around charging stations while airport employees moved quickly between gates. Rowan crouched a few feet from Sienna and gently asked whether she was lost. The girl tried to answer, but fear tightened her throat. She only nodded. Rowan asked if she knew her father's name, and after several shaky breaths, she whispered, "Marcus Vale." The name meant nothing to her. She had spent the last few years repairing boats near a quiet harbor outside Wilmington, living far away from business magazines, financial news, celebrity gossip, or anything resembling high society. She had no idea that Marcus Vale was one of the most recognizable technology investors in America. A billionaire whose company controlled logistics software used in airports across 3 continents. To Rowan, he was simply the father of a scared little girl. Sienna had become separated from her father when a security incident redirected passengers near another concourse. Marcus had been walking only several yards ahead while speaking briefly with an airport security officer when the crowd shifted unexpectedly. Sienna had followed the wrong group of passengers through a connecting corridor, realized her mistake, and panicked. She had been taught never to leave the area if she became lost, so she remained near the seats, waiting for someone familiar to appear. Rowan respected that. Instead of immediately moving her somewhere else, she asked an airport employee to contact security while she stayed beside Sienna. Callum opened his backpack and offered Sienna a small packet of crackers he had saved from breakfast. She hesitated before accepting them. Rowan distracted her by asking about the butterfly backpack, and slowly the terror in her face softened. There was something about Rowan's calm presence that children trusted. Perhaps it came from being a mother who had spent years learning how to reassure a boy who had already lost too much. Callum's father, Elias, had died from complications following a sudden illness when Callum was only 4. Rowan had been overseas when he first became seriously sick. She returned as quickly as she could, but the guilt of those missing weeks had never truly left her. After his death, she walked away from military life, moved closer to the coast, and built a quiet world around her son. Their life was not glamorous. Rowan repaired engines, restored fishing boats, and occasionally worked private maritime security contracts when bills became difficult. But every afternoon, she tried to be home before Callum returned from school. After missing so much during her years of service, Rowan had promised herself her son would never again wonder whether his mother was coming home. Sienna eventually began talking. She explained that her father was probably terrified because he worried about everything. She said her father checked hotel doors twice, memorized emergency exits, and never allowed Sienna to wander more than a few steps away in unfamiliar places. Rowan smiled gently and told her that meant her father loved her very much. What Rowan did not know was that Marcus's fear had not always existed. It had begun years earlier after someone important disappeared from his life without warning, leaving behind unanswered questions that eventually changed everything about the way he loved and protected people. Across the terminal, Marcus Vale was running. People who knew Marcus professionally would not have recognized the man racing through the concourse that afternoon. He was usually composed to the point of intimidation. Someone who could negotiate billion-dollar acquisitions without raising his voice. Yet now, his designer shoes struck the polished floor unevenly as he hurried behind 2 airport security officers. His phone remained clutched uselessly in one hand. His assistant followed several yards behind, struggling to keep pace. For 16 terrifying minutes, Marcus had imagined every possible thing that could happen to a missing child inside a crowded international airport. When security finally reported that a young girl matching Sienna's description had been found near gate C-18 with a woman and another child, Marcus barely waited for the officer to finish speaking before running toward the location. Sienna saw him first. The little girl jumped from her seat and raced forward. Marcus dropped to his knees and wrapped both arms around his daughter with such force that several nearby travelers turned to look. For several seconds, the billionaire executive disappeared entirely. There was only a father holding his child, pressing trembling kisses against her hair, fighting tears as relief crashed through his body. Rowan quietly stepped backward, giving them space. She picked up Callum's backpack and told her son they should probably head toward their gate. Then Sienna pointed toward her. She explained quickly that Rowan had stayed with her and that Callum had given her crackers. Marcus looked up, still holding his daughter. He stood and walked toward Rowan with gratitude already forming in his expression. He thanked her repeatedly and reached into his wallet, perhaps automatically searching for some way to repay her. Rowan noticed the movement and shook her head. She told him she had simply done what anyone should have done. Then Callum tugged playfully at his mother's sleeve. At her feet, Rowan's old dog moved closer, and the movement exposed the worn metal tag hanging from his collar. Marcus froze. The terminal noise seemed to vanish around him. The old collar was scratched from years of use. Engraved across the metal tag were 2 words: Adrian Vale. Marcus stared at the name as though he had seen a ghost. Rowan noticed his expression immediately. Something changed in her face, too. She looked at the tag, then at Marcus, and felt an old memory move painfully beneath everything she had tried to forget. Adrian Vale had been Rowan's closest friend, and he had been Marcus's older brother. They had met during training when both were young enough to believe courage meant never admitting fear. Adrian was loud where Rowan was quiet, optimistic where Rowan was cautious, and almost annoyingly convinced that life would eventually work itself out. During long deployments, Adrian spoke constantly about his younger brother, Marcus. He described him as brilliant, stubborn, and determined to build something bigger than the struggling family they had grown up in. At that time, Marcus had not been wealthy. He had been working 16-hour days from a rented office with 2 employees and a failing software startup. Adrian carried his first business card inside his wallet and bragged about him whenever anyone would listen. Rowan had never met Marcus, but she had heard his name hundreds of times. 9 years earlier, during an operation Rowan almost never discussed, their unit had been caught in an ambush while attempting to evacuate civilians from a rapidly collapsing area. Adrian had been severely wounded while protecting Rowan and another teammate. The evacuation helicopter arrived too late to save him. Before Adrian died, he made Rowan promise one thing. If anything happened to him, Rowan would make sure his brother received a small metal box stored with his personal effects. Rowan had intended to deliver it herself. But when she returned home, her own life collapsed almost immediately. Elias was already struggling with the illness that would eventually kill him. Rowan requested emergency leave, then extended it, then disappeared into hospitals, medical appointments, bills, sleepless nights, and the desperate attempt to hold together a family slipping through her fingers. Adrian's belongings were eventually processed through military channels. Rowan believed the box had been sent with everything else. Marcus now told her it never arrived. They sat together near a quiet window while Callum and Sienna watched airplanes taxi across the runway. Marcus explained that after Adrian's death, most of his possessions had been returned, but several personal items were missing. For years, he wondered whether something had happened during processing. He had eventually accepted that whatever Adrian wanted him to receive was probably gone forever. Rowan's stomach tightened because one memory suddenly returned with terrible clarity. The box had not been among Adrian's official belongings. Adrian had handed it directly to Rowan several weeks before the final mission and told her to keep it safe because he did not trust military shipping for something so personal. Rowan still had it. It had been sitting inside an old locked footlocker in her garage for 9 years, forgotten beneath everything else. The realization struck her brutally. Marcus saw the guilt on her face and initially misunderstood it, but Rowan explained everything. She told him about Elias, the hospital months, leaving the service, raising Callum, and the years when survival had narrowed her world to one responsibility at a time. She admitted there was no excuse for forgetting Adrian's request, only an explanation. Marcus listened quietly. When she finished, he looked toward Sienna and surprised Rowan by saying he understood more than she realized. Grief, rearranged memory. Sometimes people did not forget because something mattered too little. Sometimes they forgot because too many painful things mattered at once. Their flights became irrelevant. Marcus changed his travel plans. Rowan changed hers the next morning in full daylight beneath a clear Carolina sky. Marcus and Sienna stood outside Rowan's modest coastal home. It looked nothing like Marcus's world. There were bicycles near the porch, fishing gear beside the garage, and half-restored boat parts under a canvas cover. Rowan opened the old footlocker while Marcus waited beside her. Beneath uniforms, photographs, folded letters, and medals she had not touched in years was a small black metal box. Marcus began crying before she even opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, a cheap silver bracelet from their childhood, a photograph of Adrian and Marcus standing beside their father's old pickup truck, and a flash drive. The letter was addressed simply to Marcus. Adrian had written it before his final deployment because he knew his work carried risks. He told his brother how proud he was of the company he was building, but he also warned him not to become so obsessed with proving himself that he forgot the people waiting beside him. He reminded Marcus of their childhood, when they had almost nothing but still laughed together every day. He wrote that success would eventually find him because he was too stubborn to let it escape. But when it did, he hoped Marcus would remember that money could build houses without building homes and companies without building families. Marcus covered his mouth as he read. The flash drive contained several short video recordings Adrian had made during deployment. In one, he joked about Rowan being the quietest woman alive. In another, he said Rowan was the kind of person he trusted with his life. Then Adrian looked directly into the camera and said something that left both Rowan and Marcus silent. He said that if his brother ever met Rowan, Marcus should know she was the woman who had saved Adrian more times than he could count. Even if Rowan would probably never admit it. Rowan stepped away from the screen. For years, she had remembered only the final mission, only the moment she could not save Adrian. Hearing Adrian describe her differently broke something open inside her. The guilt she had carried was suddenly confronted by the voice of the man whose death had created it. Marcus reached for Rowan's hand. That day did not magically erase grief. It did something more believable. It gave grief somewhere to go. In the weeks that followed, Marcus remained in contact with Rowan. At first, their conversations centered around Adrian. Marcus wanted stories. Rowan had hundreds. She told him about impossible card games during deployment, Adrian singing terribly during long vehicle rides, the ridiculous nickname everyone had given him after he accidentally destroyed a coffee machine at a training facility. For the first time in years, Marcus could remember his brother without remembering only the notification of his death. Something changed in Sienna, too. She became attached to Callum almost immediately. And whenever Marcus traveled near North Carolina, the children begged to see each other. Rowan discovered that beneath Marcus's controlled public persona was a man who had spent years protecting himself from loss by controlling everything around him. Marcus discovered that Rowan's quietness was not coldness. It was the stillness of a woman who had learned how quickly life could change. Months passed. Their connection grew carefully. There were no dramatic declarations, no sudden promises. There were afternoons at the harbor while the children searched for seashells. There were lunches at small restaurants where Marcus slowly stopped checking his phone every 3 minutes. There were evenings when Rowan talked about Elias and Marcus, listened without jealousy, understanding that loving someone new did not require erasing someone who came before. One afternoon, nearly a year after the airport, Marcus brought Sienna to the marina where Rowan worked. Rowan was standing beside a restored sailboat while Callum helped polish a railing. Sienna ran toward them, laughing. Marcus remained several steps behind, watching the three of them together. Rowan's old dog still wore the same collar. The engraved tag that had once carried Adrian's name no longer felt like a weight chained to her past. It felt like a bridge. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes kindness still matters, and subscribe to Legacy and Lies. Sometimes a simple act of helping a frightened child, answering a stranger, or keeping an old promise can travel farther through someone's life than we will ever know. And before this story ends, comment "Kindness finds a way." If you believe the people we lose can still guide us toward the people we are meant to find. Years later, when Sienna was old enough to understand the strange chain of events that had brought their families together, she asked Rowan what would have happened if she had simply walked past her that afternoon at the airport. Rowan looked toward Marcus, who was standing on the porch laughing with Callum, and then at the old collar hanging around her dog's neck. She told Sienna there were thousands of people inside that airport that day, all rushing somewhere they believed they needed to be. She had been rushing too. She just happened to notice someone who needed her to stop. And sometimes, she told her, the most important destination in your life is the one you almost walk past.